So I get the sense that you guys like this. All right, let's start off with the survival of Lou. This is the second time I've seen this episode, and even though it was the second time, I was still not entirely convinced he was going to make it out of that diner alive.
He still may not. I don't know. It was an exciting moment in television history.
Keith, what was the atmosphere on the set like when you were doing that scene with Billy Bob?
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to work with him. So, and when I read what Noah had written, I got very excited about the prospect of standing opposite Billy Bob and playing that scene. We had a good time.
It went too fast, though, didn't it?
It was quick. Yeah, it was quick. But that's television. You have to work fast. But it was a treat. I mean, he's just an extraordinary talent, and it was a great day. And there were a lot of stories exchanged and jokes told, but in between, we got to stand there and have those exchanges in front of a camera. And for me, it's as good as it gets.
Now, I was glad to hear that you guys had the same reaction that I did to Lester and Linda with the parka at the end. That's pretty despicable. How did you come up with that, Noah? On the scale of things.
There were a lot of things that we did that were pretty despicable. He put a gun in a kid's backpack, and
sure.
But that's pretty much the worst. He's not a nice man. It seemed there's a certain, obviously, gamesmanship that's going on here, and I think we realized that Lester's survival instinct is stronger than just about any other part of him. And, in creating the sort of orange coat, the iconic orange coat, it suddenly became apparent that we could use that to our advantage. And those moments, where first he asks her, which is bad, and then he gives her the coat, which is worse, and then he tells her to put the hood up, which is like, yeah.
Just a complete pile-on.
Exactly. So.
Now, Allison, a lot of what you get to do that's so great on the show is, not through dialogue. It's just sort of how Molly is showing emotion, and here she has. Finally, someone has listened to her. Someone wants to hear her story.
Yeah.
Talk to me about playing both in the diner and then at the police station when she's getting the praise from Pepper and Budge.
Yeah, the scene in the diner where she finally kind of gets some recognition for her work was really nice. And they were both really excited about it. Jordan and Keegan were like, "We're so excited about this scene. Someone finally pays attention to you." Like they were personally happy for me. They were like, "Congratulations." And I was like, "Cool." But yeah, no, that was a lot of fun, and it was really that was a fun scene to play, to get to see her have a break. And then the scene with Bob and Keegan and Jordan and I was just a big ball of silly fun. But we had a good time doing it.
No, in writing the arc of the series, there have been moments when Molly's been banging her head against a wall, and then she briefly convinced Bill, and then the Chaz frame comes in, and you heard the audience response when these guys believed it. Talk about trying to balance that out so that she gets to make progress, but not too much before the end of things.
Yeah, I think it's the validation. The thing with trying to make a Coen Brothers movie is, there's no melodrama in any of their work, and so it's like, how do you create these real dramatic moments without, and then underplay them? It's my greatest goal to create something that is unpredictable, but in the end feels inevitable. So, this idea that Molly almost had Lester, it's just she was sidelined, and he one-upped her, he beat her. And then she just had to wait for her next opportunity, and she just didn't give up, and eventually it paid off. I mean, hopefully it is, it feels like a small moment, but it has such big implications.
Now, one of the things that's been interesting about the show, we've got one pair of them up here, is this is a show with great father-daughter relationships. Lou and Molly, Gus and Greta. How did that come to be a part of the piece?
Well, it's that parallel that we really liked, which is, the father-daughter, and then when she sees Gus and he says, "I let the guy go," and she's like, "Why would you let the guy go?" And then she meets the daughter, she gets it immediately because she's in that position to get it immediately, and instantly she has empathy for him in a way that someone else might not have. So I like that dynamic. I like the parallels of it and the idea, in some ways, and it was really one of my favorite parts of No Country for Old Men, and Tommy Lee Jones at the end goes to see his old, mentor who's in a wheelchair, and you realize that this, he starts off saying, his dad was a cop and his dad's dad was there's that sort of tradition, in the region. I like that idea that she's following in his footsteps and then she marries, it's like it's handing it down.
Now, and Keith, you talked before about sort of how quickly everything goes by. The two of you had to build this really authentic father-daughter relationship in not a lot of time. What was it like when the two of you got to know each other early on?
With Allison, it was so easy. I mean, she just, I give her all the credit. I do.
I will take it all. I'm kidding. No, we were a really lucky group all together because we really enjoyed each other's company and we spent quite a bit of time together off set. So it was unusual to do a scene with someone who you hadn't already had at least 3 meals with and spent some time with. So I think that was helpful. And also, because this is my first project, I think that I was in a unique position to sort of have an actual paternal relationship with Keith. He could kind of talk me through the business of the business, which he did, and I think helped.
Now, there was an immediate rapport that I felt with Allison, but as much as I would like to say that I sort of felt like looking after her and taking care of her, since this was her first big deal, she didn't need my help at all. So,
well, that brings me
which kind of reflected the father-daughter relationship in that.
Day one, the first day of shooting these 10 hours, that was it. You too. We were at Lou's Cafe.
That's right.
And you would have thought, Noah and I certainly did, that you guys had been working together for a few seasons, and here it was day one.
Well, I mean, that leads me to my next question, which is, and I'll try to ask this as politely as I can, Allison, where on earth did you come from and spring out to be this good?
We call it theater. It's a strange world with no cameras. No, I mean, I always wanted to be an actress, and I always wanted to be part of the circus, and my interests have sort of evolved over the years. I've been doing this for 10 years now, and I was just kind of plugging along like you do, and lightning struck, and Noah called me, and then my life changed. And here I am with you fine people.
Yeah. Well, Noah and Warren, I mean, were you looking for an unknown for this part, or how did this come about that you found her?
Well, honestly, there were 3 pretty well-known actresses that made it to the final round, and there was Allison, and Allison.
Who now?
Allison had a manager in Chicago, and everybody else was represented by UTA. But when Rachel Tenner, our casting director, and the Coens did recommend that Noah and I meet with Rachel, and we went, yeah, let's work with you. She said, gee, there's this tape that came in, and I want you to see it. And we'd seen 30 different actresses read the role of Molly, and there was no one that we felt was Molly. And then we looked at Allison's tape, and we were like, okay, this is really wonderful. Who's she? And then there was a final a read-off of those 3 women who were represented by UTA. By the way, where are you represented now?
UTA.
Yeah! And in New York, on that fateful weekend, ultimately Allison matched up and did the scenes, and it was really pretty clear.
Now, Warren, you were running NBC the first time that someone tried to turn Fargo into a TV show, and that didn't quite work out. It seems insane to me that anyone would be able to take this movie and make a show this good out of it. How on earth did this happen?
Well, thank goodness for Noah. But it was 97, and Bruce Paltrow came in with a writer, and they pitched, let's do Fargo. And it was a pretty straight adaptation of the Coen brothers' masterpiece. And I said yes. And we developed the script. And at the end of the day, the script was good. But it wasn't Fargo, what the Coen brothers had created. And so I passed. Although they gave me a little snow globe, and that snow globe had Marge investigating the flipped over car, and there was blood in the snow, and I loved that snow globe, and I always kept it nearby. And about 4 years ago, looking at that snow globe, I went, wow, it's time. But Noah and I were under contract to ABC, at ABC Studios, and despite the fact that we knocked on MGM's door, it really couldn't work out. Well, not too long after that, Eric Schreier from FX was meeting with MGM, looking at their catalog, and said, Fargo. Well, it took them forever to make a deal, and no writer was attached. And once they started to get together, I was like, wait a second, Noah and I want to do this, you have to hear from us. And that was it. Noah was given the opportunity. I think the words that came out of FX were, we're not sure, there has to be Marge to do Fargo. And that liberated him completely. And I think that was what he created, and where he went gave us the freedom to respect the origins and do something that was original. And nothing was more important than that.
Well, no, I'm curious. I mean, the Coens have such a distinct voice, and you've talked a lot, you're making a Coen brothers movie for TV. How do you capture that voice without it just seeming like, a bad cover band version of the Coens?
I guess the simple answer is I don't know how to explain it, or to, even if I understand it necessarily. It's, there are certain things about the way that movie is put together, and their movies in general, that I thought a lot about. There's something in the original, Jerry Lundegaard never finishes a sentence. I don't think, there's this inability to communicate that feels regional, because if you make a declarative sentence, you risk offending someone, so you always want to sidle up on what you're trying to say. So whereas as a writer, you're always looking to find the one perfect word, here it was about why use one word when 10 words will do. And then it just became about, I went in, and part of the first conversation with FX, I said, we have to figure out what is our Mike Yanagita. Mike Yanagita being the guy from the movie who calls Marge from high school, and he says, she meets him in the Twin Cities, and he tells her the story about the girl from high school, and they married, and she died of leukemia, and he's just so lonely, and then her friend calls her later, and she finds out that he made the whole thing up, and there's a restraining order, and you're like, why is this in the movie? It has nothing to do with anything, until you realize that at the beginning of the movie it says this is a true story. So then you think, well, they put it in the movie because it happened. I mean, that's the only reason you would put it in, is it's like just a weird detail that's true. So that gave me the license to say to FX, when they would say, and they didn't say very often, like, why is this in the movie? And you're like, exactly, why is it in the movie? So there was a lot of creative leeway that I would not have normally gotten.
I'm curious where Malvo came from, this agent of chaos who does things just because he enjoys winding people up and listening to the tapes afterwards.
Yeah, it's interesting. That I wanted. Obviously there's this sort of wilderness theme, that plays in. The Coens have described the region as Siberia with family restaurants, and I really like that idea that you can have the meatballs at the buffet and then freeze to death in the parking lot. Felt like a really. Like, it's a weird thing. Like, people settled there. And, we shot in Calgary, where the coldest it got was -40. And, people live there. Like, it doesn't make any sense to us. But, and they're very, polite, and they don't seem to notice. It's a very odd thing. So I like the idea that Malvo would come into town, and he, the first image that I had was of two men in the emergency room, and one is a very civilized man Lester and the other's a very uncivilized man, and the question became, who was that? And obviously the Coens between, Peter Stormare and Anton Chigurh and the villains, it's a very high bar. But, what occurred to me is that, Malvo's, there's a lot of physical violence that he perpetrates over the course of the series, but what's almost worse in the region is the violence to the social contract that he perpetrates. This idea that, it's just as important to him to get a kid to piss in his boss's gas tank as it is to get $1 million in a blackmail. Like, that idea that he is motivated by more than money and that he really is a sort of anarchic figure. And also in a strange way that he represents us as well, because he comes into this region, and he's sitting in the emergency room and Lester's telling him the story about the guy who had a thing with his wife and then he didn't want to say anything because he didn't want to embarrass him. And Malvo, like us, is saying, he slept with your wife and you don't want to embarrass him? Like, it doesn't make any sense. So he was able to show a spotlight on that as well.
Alan, there's one thing I would say. When Noah first started conceptualizing this, and it's so critical that writers ultimately can reduce what they're doing to a very clear thematic. And what Noah went into FX, looked at them and said, this is about the best of who we are up against the worst of who we are. And I think when you say, where does Malvo come from? Well, that's where Noah went, the worst of who we are.
So Allison and Keith, talk a little bit about working in Calgary and the cold. That was fun, wasn't it?
Well, it's certainly, I've said this before, it's a character in the piece. I mean, the cold is actually, it has so much to do with how people are. And I mean, what Noah was talking about, the idea that you could have a meatball and then freeze in the parking lot, it's actually true.
Yeah.
It does get that cold, and it infused everything we did. I felt like, you walk out into that air. I mean, one of the first, it was the second or third day that we worked together, we shot that scene.
This the final scene of the pilot out by the lake?
Yeah, the final scene of the pilot when we're out going to do some ice fishing. And we had to shoot in like 5-minute increments. We'd get a 5-minute standing out there and doing a take, and then we'd have to jump back in the car to try and unfreeze our faces.
Yeah.
That was 25 below zero, and with a wind chill, and we were out on a frozen lake. So, yeah, that happens.
Yeah.
But aside from that, Calgary is a beautiful city
Excellent restaurants.
with great restaurants.
Well, yeah, they actually have designed the place to deal with the cold. In fact, from the hotel, you could go entirely downtown and never leave the building. I mean, they had these series of
like gerbils,
covered bridges and things. Yeah.
but with businessmen.
Yeah. It's an interesting place.
Awesome.
And the way the series is structured, you would have different guest stars coming in at different stages. So Key and Peele come in towards the end. As each new person would arrive, as veterans, would you have to warn them about or help them adjust to what was going on with the weather?
You would, yeah.
We didn't tell them the truth.
No.
We said it's great up here. You just come on up.
No, but you did have to. I mean, it wasn't funny. You did have to dress people safely, and I mean, Adam Goldberg and Russell Harvard. I mean, they had this midnight cowboy dynamic, with the fringe and the Ratso Rizzo, but when we took them out on a frozen lake, it's not warm enough, so we put Adam in a fur coat.
And beaver shoes.
Something. No, all imitation, really, but he was warm. Let's put it that way.
Now, when you did the shootout in the whiteout, was that actually outdoors or was that on a stage?
No, that was all. Yeah, that was outdoors, and it was cold. It wasn't actively snowing for most of it, and so we had a lot of the big wind machines and all of that. And then there's a healthy amount of post effects in there as well. So that's, I don't recommend doing a blizzard episode. A, you can't shoot in an actual blizzard because you can't work, and B, it's just a lot of work. But it was fun. I mean, it came out good, I thought.
Well, I mean,
But
Allison,
for all 10 episodes, 90% of what you see on screen is the weather we were in. We were lucky enough where it was the coldest it's been in Calgary and the most snow in 20 years.
nice.
Yeah.
We were so lucky, weren't we?
Lucky. Lucky.
Well, I mean, Allison, you have to actually act while they're blowing artificial snow at you in that whole shootout scene.
Luckily, I had to act cold, so that helped. Yeah, the hardest part about it is that that the artificial snow doesn't melt when it hits things like your eyeball or your lips or whatever. So there's just take after take where I'm like, what's this? What's this over here? Just, and then your eyes, and so that was the worst part of it. More than the cold, I think, was the inhaling starch.
The asbestos that we blew out.
Now, Noah, you mentioned before the two hitmen and the weather costume, like the Midnight Cowboy guys, but they also have this really unique dynamic of the bickering couple where just one is deaf and they're communicating via ASL. That's fairly novel.
Yeah, but when it occurred to me, it felt like it fit into that Coen world, without being too gimmicky, like quirky for quirky's sake. And then, I'm an Austin resident, and I live, very close to the school for the deaf here. And so you just see walking around a lot of sign language going on, and it's such a visual and beautiful thing to see. And it also, you realize, is so private. Like if you don't speak sign language, it's a completely private form of communication. And I like that idea that they came in and they could understand each other, but no one else could understand them. And then, there's a scene where Russell is, Mr. Wrench is, he starts signing aggressively at Lester, which feels very threatening, because obviously he's saying something, and Lester feels like if he could just understand what he's saying, maybe he could talk his way out of this, but he can't.
You've got the deaf guy as the one doing the interrogations.
Exactly.
Talk a little bit about, you've got 10 hours to fill, so you have all of these characters, some of whom have these briefer arcs. So Oliver Platt came in, went out, Key and Peele have come in now, sort of people have come and gone, while you're still maintaining this through line of Lester and Lorne and Molly and Gus.
Right. Yeah, I like large ensemble shows, and I like a lot of moving pieces, and the fun is how you're going to get the pieces, bring them together at the end. Obviously, you meet Lester and Malvo in the first episode, and you probably think, all 10 episodes are going to be about Lester and Malvo in the same room, and then they're never in the same room again until episode 9. When I described this season to FX, I said, it's a circle, really. He impacts on Lester's life, and then he comes back around, but he doesn't realize how much Lester has changed since he left, and that was really interesting to me, but it also meant we had to give Malvo some place to go and a storyline that happened there. And I like the idea that, at a certain point, every action has a consequence, which is a very Coen theme, and, even Malvo kills Sam Hess, never thinks twice about it, and then he's driving down the street one day, and these two guys rear-end him, and they come out with automatic weapons. Even Malvo, the actions have consequences, and I like that idea that, we'd see Wrench and Numbers all the way through the end of episode 5 and know they were coming, and then we wouldn't see them again until the actual ambush. So hopefully you forgot about them, and you're watching, and there's Don Chump, and that didn't end well for him, and all the elements in that first half hour, and then suddenly here are these guys, and there's a certain whiplash to try to catch up with it, and hopefully that makes something energetic and exciting, versus when every move is telegraphed, an episode or two ahead.
Now, last week's episode had the big time jump, which sort of caught everyone off guard. And Lou, a year later, looks more or less the same. Molly is very pregnant. Allison, you now have to act with an empathy belly of some kind.
Yeah. It was, no, that was fun, actually. The pregnancy belly was more comfortable than the gun belt that I wore when I was having to wear that. So yeah, it was fun, comfy.
Yeah, and it was, I really like the idea that, in a quote, true story, unquote, it's like these cases often go cold for a long time, and so that felt right to me. And then, when I realized that, that she should be pregnant and they should be together, and then suddenly it is the movie in a way that, again, you hadn't expected. I really like that dynamic. And then, it's been kind of crazy to see the sort of Gus and Molly forever thing that springs up. It's like the minute you put any semblance of a love story into something, it becomes the story. So, I like the idea that in 10 episodes we could tell this amazing arc for these characters, very economically. So.
Allison, what's it like working with Colin?
He's a nightmare. I'm so glad he's not here. No, he's awesome. He's amazing. We spent a fair amount of time together before we ever filmed a scene together. We were both on set for a while. So then we sat down and filmed that first scene where we first meet in the police station in 3. At the end of a very, very long, 11-page day. It was our last scene to shoot.
1 a.m.
It was 1 a.m. We sat down to shoot that scene, and we finished, and we were both kids. We were so excited. We were both we're gonna have so much fun. We just really enjoyed each other as people, I think, which is helpful when you have to, fall in love with somebody on screen. So.
Warren, when I was on a panel with Noah yesterday, I asked him this question, so I'm curious for your take on it. This has been a big success. If there were to be a second season, how would you want to approach that?
With the same standard that we delivered, it seems that audiences, critics, that somehow we managed to climb this mountain and give them a Fargo that holds up. And this is anthological, has a beginning, middle, and end, and so there's no cliffhanger, there's satisfaction. And somewhere out there, could there be another true crime in the frozen tundra of Fargo? Yeah, there could be, and that would be great. But we're more focused on delivering right now for the audience and satisfying them. The feedback has been amazing. And we hear it, and hearing you in this audience is spectacular for us. Your laughter and your gasp.
Oh no, he didn't.
Keith, you've been doing this for quite a while. Allison, this is an amazing start to a career for you. I mean, have you guys talked a little bit about what it must be like for her to start off this way?
I mean, we've chatted about it. I don't know. I think that the thing I really took away from getting to know Keith is that, how long have you been doing this now? A spell?
42 years.
A long time. But, we've talked about, it's still really about, doing the readings and getting the parts and doing the work and then looking at the next one that you can do to get the next role, and that was really interesting and really nice to be around straight away, because it'd be easy to kind of get wrapped up, I think, in this process. And to have this be your first project is, of course, an unbelievable dream come true, but also could very easily be something that you'd be like, and this will be how it is forever, which I'm sure that it won't be. So it's nice to kind of get that feedback from Keith about, really just the work and getting the work done, and that it is a sustainable life, and to kind of see how he navigates that was interesting.
Yeah, whatever I've been able to share with Allison, yes, I've been doing this a long time. If I've learned anything, it's that you're never there. You're always on the journey. I have never felt as though I have arrived. I've always felt as though I've made it around the next corner, and now I have to make it to that corner. So there's a sense of that in what we do, and that's the beauty of it for me, is that you're always striving to be present, and when you're given material like this, it makes it a lot easier. But if I've been able to share anything with Allison, it's that you're not going to wind up resting on your laurels canyon in this business.
All right, and finally, before we go, Noah, I'm curious if there is anything for these people who have now seen episode 9. Any sentence you would care to tell them about episode 10?
Hold on to your butts.
And that seems as good a note as any to end on. The cast and creators of Fargo.
Thank you.
Thank you.